All right, so before I start, let me just make sure to say this. I will have my email and my IG down in the description. And if you want me to do a face rating for you, I will do it for you. And I'll give you the instructions. And from there, within 24 to 48 hours, depending on how busy I am, I'll give you your face rating with the PDF. And in this video, we're also going to do Ben Shapiro. I need to make sure I say that so I won't forget. And his overall facial rating is a 6. How rare is that? That's 1 in 5.6 people. His percentage of people is the top 17%. The side facial score is a 60% for the harmony. His front facial score harmony is a 74%. His total facial harmony is a 69%. His facial dimorphism is a 6. His body fat factors is a 4. His miscellaneous features is a 7.5. And now I got the tier list to the right side. Tier 1, ideal. Tier 2, near ideal. Tier 3, normal. Tier 4, slight flaw. Tier 5 is a flaw. Tier 6, huge flaw. And Tier 7 breaks harmony. Alright, so the overall facial assessment breakdown. These are the major flaws that I've noticed about his face. So let's start from there. Ben needs to reduce his body fat levels down to at least 15% in order to reveal any bone structure in his face to enhance the facial leanness of his face. In the front profile view, the eyes are very narrow, and this is caused by the short height of the inner eye, and this measurement is relative to the width of the eye corners. In the side profile view, the lower lip lacks forward protrusion relative to the upper lip, although the chin protrusion is very high, and with this can help some of the lip measurements, but completely shift the mental labial angle always from the ideal range. So what I meant to say is that the lower lip is more protrusive than the upper lip, and I'll explain it later. The lower lip is the upper lip is my fault. The upper lip is more protrusive than the lower lip, but the chin helps the lip measurements, and it helps some of the lip measurements, but also with the chin being a little bit too protrusive, is gonna deviate the mental labial angle. So it's gonna deviate the mental labial angle from being within the ideal range. I'll explain a little bit later on. Now these are the rating scores of other celebrities so you can compare. All right, so let's start off with this eye separation ratio. It's at 45%, and this is good. Goes from the pupils, the distance between the pupils compared to the distance between his cheekbones, and this is within the ideal range. His facial thirds is a tier 2, and the reason why is it a tier 2 is because his middle third is a little bit short, but this is still not bad at all. This is near ideal. Now with the eye separation ratio, one thing I will say is it's good that it's 45%, but this is at the lower end. There's a reason why I'm saying that. So his eyes are at the lower end of the ideal range. His canthal tilt is at a 4.5. This is near to ideal, so this is not bad at all. You do want to have a highly positive canthal tilt to the eyes. This makes your face look more youthful. His facial width to height ratio, so it's FWHR, so how compact is your mid face, and it goes from the eyebrows down to the upper lip, compared or relative to the width of the face, and his is at 2.01, so this is good, and that is within the ideal range. His jaw frontal angle is a tier 1 at 84. Now that is at the lowest end, but still, that is a good frontal jaw angle, nevertheless. His cheekbones high settiness, so how high set is his cheekbones, and his is at 88%, and 88% is really, really good. So he does have very, very high cheekbones, and this is model-like for a person to have this high of a cheekbone. So this is perfect. His bigonial width is a tier 1, so this determines how wide is his jaw, and 90% is pretty wide, is on the higher end, so he does have a very wide jaw. His total facial height to width ratio is a tier 1 at 1.36, so he does have a little bit of a longer side of a face, I guess you can say, for a man, but it's still within the ideal range, so this is perfect. His chin to filtrum ratio is a tier 4. His philtrum is a little bit shorter for his chin. He does have a very long chin, and for that reason, that's why I deducted some points for that. So if his chin was a little bit shorter, it would have been within the ideal range. His neck width is a tier 3 at 80%. So His neck is not wide enough for his face, and like I said again, he does have a wide jaw, so that also adds to it. His mouth to nose width ratio is a tier 1. He does have a perfectly relationship between his nose and his mouth. And I also took into account in this picture because he is smiling, so I kind of went a little bit more in. But even though I still went in, his mouth is wide enough for his nose, so that's good. His mid-face ratio is a tier 1, and that means that his mid-face is perfect. So it goes from the distance between the pupils versus the distance between the eye line down to the upper lip, and it measures how long your mid-face is, and his is perfect. His eyebrow settiness, so how high set is his eyes, and he has very low set eyebrows, and it's slightly outside of the ideal range, but I still gave it to him because the average person still wouldn't really notice, and is only off by 0.04, so that is minuscule, so I just gave him that, so that's perfect either way it goes. His eye spacing, so your eyes should be one width eyes apart, and his is a little bit more than one width eyes apart, so that would be still within the normal range, but that wouldn't be within the ideal range. So he does have a lot of spacing between his eyes. His eye aspect ratio is a tier 5 at 4.4, so his eyes are extremely narrow. Even though he's smiling in this picture, it'll still be extremely narrow, so this would not be ideal, so that would be a flaw. His lower lip to upper lip ratio, he does have very thin lips, which is not ideal, but nevertheless, it is at 1.6, which is ideal. So his upper lip is lower than his lower lip. So you do want to have an upper lip that's smaller than your lower lip. That is perfect. So the next one is the deviation between the ipsilateral aliar angle versus the jaw frontal angle, and it should be no higher than 15 degrees, and his is at 11 degrees and still within the normal range, but this is not ideal. You want these two angles to be parallel, so this is the angle created from the midface going from the nasion all the way to the outer edges of the eyes versus the jaw frontal angle. His eyebrow tilt, so you do want to have positively tilted eyes for a male, and his is at 8 degrees, so this is perfect. His bitemporal width, so the width of your forehead relative to the width of your actual face or your cheekbones, and his at 90%. So this is at the higher end of it, but actually no, this is not at the higher end of it. This is at the middle portion of it, but still this is perfect for a male. So his bitemporal width is perfect, and bitemporal width is pretty much your forehead exposure. Just to let y'all know that. His lower lip proportion is a tier 1 at 30%, and 30% is not too bad. And this is actually at the ideal range, so or close to the ideal range. Anything less than this will be unideal. So this is at the lower end of the ideal range for the lower third proportion. So 33% is the perfect ideal, but he doesn't shift too far from it. His ipsilateral aliar angle, so the angle that I talked about that's created from the nasion all the way to the upper end of the eyes, and his at 95 degrees, and this is at the highest end of it, like I said again, and I think this is due to him having a lot of space in between the eyes itself, so I think that kind of makes this angle kind of deviate a little bit. The next one is, and this is the side profile, so the gonial angle. This is going to be the first measurement, and his is at 123 degrees, and this is a tier 1, so he's at the highest end of it, but this is ideal nevertheless. His nasofrontal angle is a tier 1, so this goes from the brow ridge, so this kind of measures like how protrusive your brow ridge is, and his is at 120 degrees, and this means that he does have a very protrusive brow ridge because the angle is going to be very more on the acute side and not too obtuse, so that is perfect. And his mandibular plane angle is at 11 degrees, and 11 degrees is not ideal. This means that he does have a flat mandible, and his mandible is almost parallel to the ground. You do want to have a mandible that is a little bit more downswung, not too downswung, but not too flat, just a nice gentle tilt downwards, but his is too flat to the ground. It might not look like that in this way because his head is shifted down, he's looking down, but he does need a mandible that is a little bit more steeper. The ramus to mandible ratio is at 75%. So how long is your ramus compared or relative to your mandible? And you don't want it to be any higher than the 77%, and his is at the higher end of it, so he does have a very long ramus. And you do want this to be at a good amount of length for your ramus right here. And this indicates that is that he has a lot of jaw body, and having a lot of jaw body is perfectly ideal for a male face. His facial convexity going from the glabella, so it goes from the glabella all the way to the subnasal, down to the chin, and his is at 166, so his facial convexity is a little bit more rounded, a little bit more on the rounder side, but this is not too far from the ideal, which is at 168 for the lower end of it, so his is only shifted by 2 degrees. His submental cervical angle is 122, so this is at the normal range, but it's not ideal, by no means necessary. He does have a lot of high hyoid, as you can see right there, so a lot of fat underneath the chin as well, and yeah, it's going to be at 122 degrees, and this is not ideal by any means. If you want to be more closer to the ideal range, you want to be at least around 100 degrees. His nasal facial angle, so this is the inner angle created from the nose all the way down, or the nasal bridge all the way down to the chin, and his is slightly off by 1 degree, literally, and this is going to be a tier 2. But if his nasal bridge, or if his nose was less upturned, maybe he would have been within the ideal range if his nose was just a little bit less upturned, but still, this is not too bad at all, so that is really close to the ideal range. His nasal labial angle is at 115 degrees, and this is at the higher end, so this determines how upturned or downturned your nose is, and his is pretty upturned, so that is ideal. His orbital vector, so your bone protrusion underneath the eye, you want it to be more protrusive, so to make your eyes more deep set, and his is neutral, so he doesn't have too much bone support underneath the eyes, but is within a decent range, so it's not going to look too buggish, but it's not going to look too deep set. His total facial convexity is a tier 1 at 141 degrees, and this also, just the only difference between your facial convexity and your total facial convexity is that it adds the nose as well, or the nasal protrusion as well, and his is perfect at 141 degrees, and this is within the middle portion of the ideal range, so this is perfect. So his nasal protrusion did help. His mental labial angle is at 100 degrees, and this is not ideal at all. It's still within the normal range, but like I said again, his chin is just way too protrusive relative to his lower lip, and that little indent right there is not ideal. So this is just too tight of an angle. His facial convexity from the nasion is at 158 degrees, and the only difference between this is that the line goes from the nasion instead of the glabella, and like I said again, his facial convexity is too rounded, so this is not going to be within the ideal range. His nasal projection is slightly off at 0.69, which is at 69%, so it goes from the width of the nose right here relative to the nasal bridge of the nose. And he does have a little bit slightly more projected of a nose than the ideal range, and that is going to be slightly off of the ideal. But this is not, something that's bad or anything like that. His nasal width to height projection is completely off. He does have a very short and stubby nose, so that is going to be a flaw, or a slight flaw, I should say. His rictus E line is going to be a tier 3. So like I said again, your lower lip right here is supposed to be more closer to the line than your upper lip, so that is going to be a flaw. His lower lip is not that protrusive compared to his upper lip. So the H line goes from the upper lip down to the chin, and his lower lip doesn't necessarily touch that line, and it's supposed to touch that line. And it's close to it, but it doesn't touch it. Even if his mouth was closed, it still wouldn't touch it, so that would be a tier 2. The S line, the Steiner S line, goes from the middle portion of the nose all the way down to the chin, and both lips are supposed to be touching. His lower lip is supposed to be touching the line, but unfortunately it doesn't touch, so I gotta make that tier 3. And also his upper lip goes a little bit past the line as well. So his bursal line goes from the subnasal down to the chin, and you want your upper lip to pass the line, which it does, but his lower lip is actually behind the line, and it doesn't even touch the line, so I can't even give that, or actually, yeah, it does touch the line, my fault, but it doesn't go past the line, so I gave that a tier 2. And like I said again, his lips are just unprotrusive, but his chin protrudes, so that kind of like complements it a little bit more, or kind of like helps it out a little bit more with these lip measurements. But still, nevertheless, the lips, or the bottom lip I should say, is just not protrusive enough for it to be ideal for the lip measurements, or for all the lip measurements. The nasal-mental angle is a tier 3, and that is close to the ideal range at 125, and his is at 124. And like I said again, his facial convexity is a little bit too rounded, and if his facial convexity wasn't a little bit too rounded, this would have been perfect. His gonio to mouth relationship, so it determines if you have an